I did my research project over General MacArthur in Japan during the U.S. occupation. I chose to do this kind of because I read a book about the U.S. occupation of Japan after World War II, and all I could think to myself was, why have I never heard of this before? Like, I feel like that's pretty important. And so when we got to pick our own topics, I wanted to dive deeper into the issue, and I kind of just wanted to see like what the Japanese people felt about these people coming in and changing everything about their country. And in my opinion, I would be mad. Like, I was really surprised during my research for what I found, because I thought they would be very upset because everything that they had known was just switched in a matter of 5 years. My question was, how did General Douglas MacArthur gain the support of Japanese citizens during the United States occupation of Japan? And that's just kind of what I went off of. That was the first question I had, and then as I dug deeper in my research, I kind of switched a little bit to focus more on the positive things that the citizens were saying. So there was some pushback at first when MacArthur was put in as the sole authority of Japan by the United States and the Allies, but mainly the United States. When this happened, all other people of power kind of just disappeared. It was just MacArthur. He made all the decisions. He really didn't have anyone over him. They kind of laid out the outline of what he was supposed to do, but after they told him that, they kind of just disappeared. It was all up to him. He got to make decisions, do what he felt was right. When I was doing my research, I found military documents that kind of outlined everything that happened from the beginning of the war until the end of the war. And then information about the occupation, and it was written by MacArthur and other military personnel. One quote that I found was, the initial policy guideline proclaimed a variety of basic liberties such as freedom of religion, the right to form political parties, the abrogation of discriminatory laws, and it also ordered the release of political prisoners. It mandated creation of a democratic judiciary and the reform and decentralization of police powers. These were basically the only guidelines that MacArthur got. These came from the United States, didn't even come from the Allied powers. They just said, go in there, do whatever you have to do to get this stuff done. And MacArthur kind of took that as, okay, I'm gonna write a new constitution and I'm gonna change the whole structure of their government, which is understandable because of the events that took place in World War II. They wanted to make sure Japan was unarmed. They can't have a military. They can't be ready for war. They can't do any of that. And the government of Japan is the reason why most of the things happened. They were militaristic. They treated the citizens really poorly. They put them in a lot of debt. People were starving. People were dying because they didn't have food, water, basic necessities. And so MacArthur went in there with these guidelines in mind, and then everything else that happened was just decisions made by MacArthur that he thought were the best. So as I said, there were some negative feelings towards a whole nother country coming in and changing everything. One of the people, I want to say it was someone who worked for the emperor at the time, said American soldiers would loot Japan, Americans would rob Japan of all the food, women and girls would be violated, all men would be killed, and what was left of Tokyo would be devastated. Obviously, these are valid concerns. Some of them did happen, but it was up to MacArthur to make the people of Japan feel safe, feel like their voices were being heard, feel like they weren't coming in there to just take everything they had. They weren't going to do all these terrible things to the citizens. And MacArthur did everything he could to get the opinions of the citizens to change. And in my paper, I focused kind of on, the first couple pages are basically just on MacArthur. They're about what people in the United States thought of him, what the presidents thought of him, what people who worked with him or under him thought of him, and they're not very positive. They're very negative. They think one book is called The Most Dangerous Man in the World, MacArthur. And so obviously if you're thinking about how these people saw him by reading those things, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, he's not a good person, he's terrible, but he also had a way of making people really like him beyond the words he was saying and the tone of his voice. He did end up giving them free rights and a lot of other rights, like speeches, freedom of speech. Women used to be treated very badly in Japan, and he gave them a voice also. This is in a letter that was written to the government of Japan by a Japanese citizen. It says, "By the grace of godly General MacArthur, speech is free. Let us sing in freedom over the green fields." I chose this quote to add in here because I think it really just shows the feelings toward MacArthur. In multiple letters, they speak of MacArthur as a God figure. They praise him for everything. He did make speech free, which is why they were even allowed to write the letters to him, praising him. And it was just, they really, really praised him and saw him as kind of the hero of their world. Here's some other examples from the letters, and the letters were like my main source of information from the Japanese point of view. Everything else that I saw was like statements from soldiers that were stationed there, statements from MacArthur, like just the United States side. And so when I was doing my research, I really wanted to focus on the voices of the Japanese people because I was just really curious on what they thought about it. But His Excellency General MacArthur, that is used multiple times in a bunch of letters. There is probably 10,000 letters written to him, and half of them are stated as His Excellency. They thought of him as kind of like the fill-in emperor at the time, because he was the sole authority. The next line is also from the same letter. "The stationing of your troops in Japan and political reform are great things that are welcomed by all the Japanese people." They supported it. They wanted more people to come in and help them because at that point they were so devastated with how their country was. They needed someone to come in and save them. They needed someone to come make changes. They needed a new emperor. They needed new people in charge. They were very, very welcome to help, even though they were a little resistant at first. After they realized what all could come from this, they were hopeful. And another source that I found, it's like they saw MacArthur as like a father figure. Like the Japanese citizens were the children that he was there to protect, and the emperor is usually looked at as a father figure, but he was not doing the job that they thought he would. And then the next quote is, "The letter begins with, 'Honorable General, who I most admire, please forgive me, a person of low status, for directly and suddenly writing a letter to you, the hero of the world.'" In this letter, MacArthur is referred to as the hero of the world throughout the entire letter. And this was like a 10-page letter to him. I think that quote right there shows how little respect the old Japanese government had for people. The way he apologizes for his low status and for writing him directly. He would not have been able to do that if he was writing to the old emperor or anyone in charge before MacArthur came in there. And then he also referred to him as the hero of the world, and that just goes back to the previous slide when they were calling him godly and just how much respect they had for him. They were so in need of help that MacArthur coming in was like Superman coming in. Like that's the feeling that they got. He was there to save them. And then the next one is, "Also, as a result, the Japanese people are experiencing indescribable suffering. At present, many have no place to live. There is not enough food to eat, and with the soaring cost of living, many are hovering at the edge of death." And then the writer asked MacArthur to do anything to help these people because the economy was literally killing them, not just figuratively, literally. And you saw these in multiple letters too. They were begging for help. And in the concerns that they brought up, they thought that the soldiers were going to come in and take all their food that they had. They didn't have much to begin with. And so also seeing the letters begging for something to change, I mean, it's really powerful. And then we would like to make our country the symbol of peace and culture. We believe it possible. We desire you to lead us so that our hope and endeavor to the brilliant future should be realized. This came from a letter that was asking if Japan could be a new territory of the United States. And that was in multiple letters. They wanted to be part of the United States. They wanted the freedom that we have. They saw us as a symbol of peace. And they wanted MacArthur to stay in Japan and be their new emperor. And so I found that really interesting that they would want an outsider to come in and just take over their country. They were done with their leaders and government. They were making them die. They committed all the war crimes. They did horrible things, and they wanted to change. And so that's the main focus of my paper was the perspectives of the Japanese citizens. And there were some negative letters in the essay that kind of gave the other perspective, but majority were really positive and looked up to him and wanted him to stay. And then that also connects back to how important their support was for MacArthur, leading to the country it is now. MacArthur rewrote their constitution. They still have that constitution. And it all just ties together with what we see in Japan now. Any questions?
So when you first set out with your research, did you expect to find so much support for MacArthur, or did you expect it to be more along the lines of demonizing him?
I went into it thinking, okay, MacArthur ruined the country. They hate him. He did nothing right. Like, he went against authority and wrote the Constitution. Why would he do that? Like, they should have wrote it. And then as I started digging deeper, I was like, actually, they paint MacArthur as a bad guy. I'm not saying he's a good guy, but he did good things in Japan. So yeah, it was totally different than I expected.
When you were reading about like the pushback at the initial point, was there like a separation you found, like who was complaining versus who was happy to see him, or was it just kind of a mixed bag all over?
I think everyone was really like unsure about him at first because, you know, it's a different country coming in. Right. But the first ones to kind of turn around and really support him were the people that were of the lower class. Like the emperor, he was unsure about him. He came around to the idea, like he liked what he was doing, but he was probably, the people higher up were the last ones to kind of support him and want him to stay.
So I know most of the time, you know, history doesn't, in the United States, we don't talk about the U.S.'s history with other countries that we've gotten involved with because a lot of the time it's bad, so we don't teach the bad.
Yeah.
Why do you think we don't teach this, even though this seems to be good?
Well, there were a lot of things that happened during the occupation that they don't want us to know about. Mm-hmm. So, although MacArthur did change like the future of the country, what the soldiers that were under him did is probably the main reason we don't learn about it, because they committed a lot of horrible things.
And I actually have one more question. Do you know if from your research, if in Japan in schools they teach a lot about MacArthur?
I actually don't know. I didn't look into that, but
okay.
That's really interesting. I should. I would like to know too.